Hi, welcome back to our podcast, The Ins and Outs of Selling a Business. We're really excited to continue our conversation today regarding the intangible aspect of your company and how that drives value to help you maximize on the sales price. Not only from a standpoint of price, but also you're taking care of your employees, the culture, the legacy you create. So we're really happy to have back with us to continue this conversation, Eric Lawton of Impact Financial Wealth Management. Eric, it was an amazing conversation. You talked about the 4 C's of intangibles, how they help business owners and in general drive value, not only for selling, but also just for long term, whether it's transition or whatnot. We talked at length on human capital, and there's 4 C's, and so now we're looking at let's see if we can get through one or two more before we, for our audience. So, we talked about the human capital, and what's next on your list that's really important and really drive value.
Well, so look, when we're doing business, we're doing business with the people that are in our company, which is our human capital that we talked about. But then it's the people outside that are customers, right? So that's what we call the second C or second intangible. It's our customer capital. And so we say, okay, well, what does that mean? The capital is the measure of the strength that you have in the relationships with whom you do business.
Right.
Right. So, really honing in on making sure that you can measure and define those things. So we want to take a look at that and say, okay, I have my customer base. Let's delve in. So if you could define what you do best as a company, who do you do business with the best? And do you dominate the market in those one or two things?
Right. We call that the stickiness factor with your customers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and also it helps attract new customers, because that's what in transferring your business to another owner, they want to see, not just the people that you're currently doing business with, but if you really dominate in one or two areas, that's like a magnetic factor.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's driving people to you. Another part is looking at your current customer base. Do you regularly analyze the profitability by customer and by product? So oftentimes we have manufacturing, right? We make a variety of different parts, and we sell a variety of different ones. But do we hone in and look at the margins and the profitability of each of those parts? And if we do, and we notice that there's a trend towards a particular product or service that's creating more value or providing us a higher margin, I wonder why we shouldn't be focusing in on that. And it goes back to the first one of, are we really good at just one or two, really great, dominate one or two things, or are we trying to be all things to all people? If we have less customers but make a greater impact,
right,
that could very well be a more scalable business.
Right. Do what you do best. Right. I mean, and those are the things. So to your point, so, it really touches on a couple of things, because, one of the big issues is on the customer side, you call it customer capital, is like your family close to a business, there tends to be concentration, right? If you're in aerospace, and we have several clients we sold recently in aerospace, if you only have 4 or 5 customers, right? You got GE, you got Pratt, you got Honeywell, you got, Rolls-Royce, and maybe a few other ones. So you look at that and you say, okay, and the buyer's concerned, well, you have how's your relationship with, in this case, GE, right? And then you have to talk about this, I call it that stickiness, why we're in there. We have long-term agreements. They've been a customer for 25 years. They rely on us heavily on doing the engineering aspect because they don't have the time, effort, and people. So they're actually using our engineering staff to help them design and refine new parts for new machines, for for jet engines, right? So that should give the buyer, even though maybe 60% of your business with, let's say, GE, a high level of confidence that we're tied to them.
So we call that being indispensable.
Right. Good word.
Are you indispensable to that company? And how do you become indispensable? You're integral to that customer's success. So you're not just selling to them, or they're not just your customer. You've now become their partner. You're their partner in success. You're integral and you're indispensable, because without you and your team, they can't innovate. So if you can help that company innovate and grow, so now you are indispensable, because you might then create another widget to help them get to the next level. That's pretty mind blowing if you think about that for a second.
Yeah, you're 100% right, because they are relying on you to do the work. I mean, just to kind of follow up, and I'm throwing a couple of examples here. Is we had another client that about 70% of the business with Siemens, right? But their margins were below like industry averages. So, we decided to take the company off market because they're just not. We didn't like what we saw from a value proposition. So I brought in a couple of consultants, and we went through every SKU, right? And we found out that 20% of the SKUs, the bottom 20%, had either no profitability or minimal profitability. It was driving our EBITDA margin down from 15% to 8%. So we and I was part of the team kind of working with them on this. We went back, said, you got to go. We went back to the Siemens, and our client did, and said, look, we analyzed all our SKUs on these family of parts. We can't do it profitably. So we're not going to take them out of our factory, but, initially, but we're going to help you find another vendor that can do them, because we just can't make money doing them. Or we have to raise our price. And guess what they said? Raise your price.
Okay.
Because we are so tied into you. For us to move it to another facility, to get them requalified or qualified to do this kind of part, have all the licenses, all the requirements, and we don't have the resources to work with them. We have there's an unknown, like you said, indispensable. We don't know who they are and what they can do. So our client, and we had a target of getting to a 15% EBITDA margin before we sold the business. We reworked all the pricing on all those parts, and guess what? A year later, we're at 15% EBITDA margin. And we sold the company for twice the value of where it was 3 years ago. To your point, indispensable of why it's important on the customer side to have that open have that dialogue. If that relationship's there, they will work with you.
Let me ask you a question at that point in time, or was it beforehand? But what a great opportunity then. And always this time, this is sort of one of those things that touchy subject, but could that relationship become a little bit tighter with a contract?
Well, they were under long-term agreements with several of the parts. It wasn't a purchase order deal. They had LTAs, right?
Yeah.
But they basically said, look, we're running out. We're running out of this LTA, long-term agreement, on this family of parts, and we're not going to renew. Okay. We're not going to leave you in the dust because you're a good customer of ours, but we're going to work to move these parts out. So,
and the reason I bring that up is because the last part is with the customer capital is, most importantly, those relationships have to be transferable to the next owner. And so that is a beautiful example, what you just described, with creating absolute value. It's contractual and they can't live without you. So you're indispensable to them. And so now it's transferable.
Right. And to the point, and again, it's not the owner by him or herself or having this conversation. It's the team below him. It's the production manager. Yeah. It's the quality people, right? It's the engineering staff, head of engineering. They're the ones that communicate with the purchasing people at the other side. The CEO is running the business, but has directed his team collectively. We need to do something here, based on the analysis that we did as outside consultants coming in here and say, look, you need to do something here, right?
Yeah.
And so when a new ownership comes in, and by the way, the CEO is still there, the head of quality is still there. He was part ownership, and one guy who was I'll call him general manager who needed to retire. He left, but he left after 2 years, and we had adequate people to replace him. But to your point, is that stickiness factor, and then showing a potential buyer what we did and had to do to get our margins up, why we did that, is a confidence builder.
Yeah.
And going forward. So, that customer capital piece, because it's like the third question on the list. I mean, when you're talking to a buyer, who owns the customer relationships?
Right.
And if everything points to the owner, that means the owner is going to be there for a long time, and he's going to see a lot of his purchase price on the back end based on performance versus getting cashing out. If he or she says, well, I have a head of sales and we have 8 people underneath him, we have 5 sales engineers, and they're the people that are doing the work over the last 5 years. I've transitioned all over the last 5, 10 years to them, and I'm running the business. They're running that piece. That answer drives value.
And I imagine, with the success that the human capital, the management team, by them delving in and creating higher margins and on those products, on those SKUs, they probably got rewarded handsomely for doing that.
Yeah. Again, this is a client that had a system, company-wide bonus plan, everybody based on performance. So they got rewarded. They got rewarded every quarter for hitting the number. It came in the paycheck as a bonus. So the third. So as we talked about human, we talked about customer. The third one you kind of bring is called structural capital.
Right.
Interesting way of phrasing it.
It is, and there's a lot to it. We won't go crazy, but it's, think about the strength of your strategy, the systems, the process that run the business. So oftentimes, the business owner and the people in the management team below, they sort of run the business through osmosis. They know what the processes are. But if they were to leave, how would the business run itself? So it's really, have you written down, do you have in place the structure, the processes, the systems? Is everything documented? Every business, again, is through osmosis. It's the secret sauce, right? Well, it's a secret. It's secret sauce. It can't be a secret. It's got to be documented. It's got to be proven. It's got to be transferable. That word is, you'll see, on and on and on. Are my customers transferable? My systems transferable? Are my, and that's what this structural is. What we have to put the secret sauce, write it down, show that it's proven, show that it's scalable, show that it's transferable.
Yeah, making that investment in what you call structural capital is critical, because more often than not, we have clients, again, family close to businesses, low middle market, less than 250 million in revenue, that their systems don't talk, right? They have an accounting system, they have a job shop system, so I'm talking manufacturing here, right? But they have this elaborate Excel spreadsheet, right, that they utilize to take the information out of the job shop or job boss, or whatever you want to call it, right? And then they load that up into the financials. So it's not real time. And if you need something, you can't get it looking in the accounting system. You have to have somebody go over and pull it from, what's the cycle time, what's the material cost, all this stuff is, it's not an integrated ERP system. And that is an area where buyers get concerned. What are we missing?
Sure.
Is there areas here that is the data good? Are we confident in it?
Right.
And as a small business, where that number shows up is an inventory, right? Do I have a good inventory number? It's a constant discussion on any distribution manufacturing company is, your raw materials, work in process, finished goods. How accurate is that number? What are you reserving it? I mean, those drive value, and like you say, that's a system issue. And so, making that investment early on, and it's not just, getting an ERP system, it's getting as you say, the human capital, the team that can run that ERP system, right? So you bring that up because, we have clients that, literally are running on QuickBooks, right? Great little system, does run wonderful things, but it doesn't tie in anything, right? It's just numbers, or running on an old Peachtree accounting system or some, who knows, that the numbers are the numbers, but when you try to integrate it, you can't find ways to save, make yourself more efficient, produce a higher profitability, better margin, because you're not talking to your other system, right? So, and that's, on that structural piece, and you say the knowledge transfer is a systems in place that I can plug and play, and I can bring somebody in from the outside that gets it. We had an example, this is a true story years ago. We had a client that had a windowsill, and he had, wrote checks, and depending on how high the checks were, determined how his cash flow was. If I had a bunch of checks over here, my cash flow is not good, but when my cash flow was good, I only had a few checks on the windowsill. But he, as you said, he felt it. He can feel his business, but at some point you grow out of that. So,
so the structure of capital, it's 4 areas, sort of sum it up. It's 4 areas. It's processes. It's people, technology, and the facilities. You mentioned in our last podcast, there were 2 identical businesses. One was sort of stagnant. One, grew multiple times. And it was because it was able to evolve. It was able to look at its human capital and grow it, and let them evolve and be part of the compensation of the growth. You've got the customer capital allowing, you gave a great example in this podcast here about the company that was looking at the SKUs and then had a heart to heart with their customer, and they said, raise the price because we can't afford to go to somebody else. We value our relationship with you. That made them more valuable. And then having a structure in place where those processes, the people, the technology, and then the facility might have to grow in order for the business to grow. And I know what you do, Keith, and you're invaluable to your clients, because when you walk in the door and introduce yourself, and when you're talking to them and you become a consultant to them, you really do. And you're really going in there when it comes to structure or capital, and you're saying to them, look, this is a purpose to connect people and knowledge so it can be shared, so that you can be scalable.
Right.
And you really help them with it.
Well, again, we try to point out all the quote unquote, bumps in the road, areas you need to focus on, and in the planning process. And so, sometimes, look, we a lot of times we get in at the tail end. Fortunately, sometimes we get in early, a couple years before, so we can. We're not exit planners. I firmly believe if we're selling a company, we should not be helping. We can consult, but we don't want to be making that decision. Now's the time to sell, right? Because I look at it as an independence issue. That's just the way I am. As you're hiring us to do a job, but we can bring people in like yourself to say, hey, look, here's a team that has expertise in these areas. And, again, you may want to focus on 1 or 2, right? Because depending on where you are in your life cycle as a business owner, but focus a little bit on here over the next couple of years, and then we can drive value, from 10 million to 20 million, right? If you execute.
Right.
So the last I'm running out of time here, but the last one I just want to, and we've touched this separately, but the last, we've talked about human capital, customer capital, structure capital, and then there's the social capital, right? Which plays a huge role, by the way, with all these, various platforms out there. And buyers look at social capital. They look at LinkedIn. They looked at TikTok. They looked at Instagram. They looked at Facebook. They do a deep dive. They are scraping everything and due diligence. And so how your people present themselves, how you present yourself, how you present your company in these forums, websites, is extremely important.
You're correct, and there. So you divide sort of social capital into two arenas. So you've got internally, and you've got externally. And so you're speaking right now of the external,
Right.
which is important. How does the world perceive your company, and that's extremely important. Um, but before you can do that, and I think in this day and age, so oftentimes people jump because it's the new shiny object. It's not that new anymore, but social media is the shiny object. So people are focusing more on, hey, how does the world perceive us? But if they start from within and really look at the culture internally, right? Because when you're buying a business, when you're a buyer of a business, that's what you're buying. You're buying both, but you want to know, what is the strength of your internal culture, and can it self-perpetuate? Because it ties the other three intangible capitals together. If
Right.
you have an amazing culture internally and it self-perpetuates, that's going to attract more human capital. It's going to attract the right people to the company, right? If you have really great social capital and it's perpetuating, it's going to, and to your point, through social media, how does the world perceive your business? How does your community perceive your business? That's going to attract the right customers. That improves your customer capital. I want to do business with this company because they do good in our community.
Or I want to buy this business because the culture the culture that the business has created, aligns with how we think. And by the way, from our perspective, culture, it plays a huge role when we're working with our clients to make a decision who's the best buyer, the right fit, right? If we're sitting there and we've passed on many buyers who had very good offers, and we went with a different buyer because our client perceived them, they didn't align with our interests. They didn't see our
Right.
culture. So that culture piece you're creating is something you want to transform, whether you're doing an internal thing, family thing, but with the buyer community, you want to make sure that they appreciate these aspects, because when you're that value proposition, right? Price, legacy, employees, the culture, that culture piece is critical, because if a buyer comes in and doesn't buy into your culture, it's going to make your employees miserable. It could derail a transaction, or you're going to walk away from the business and you're going to have people you're going to see in the street who work for you and said, like, why'd you sell to them? I'm not happy.
Yeah.
And they eventually leave.
Right.
So we kind of hit the wall on time here, but I greatly appreciate you coming back. I mean, this whole conversation on intangibles and how they drive value and importance, not just for selling, but just building your business for legacy purposes, next generation purposes, is critical. So I can't thank you enough. And maybe, down the road, we'll have you come back and maybe talk a little more detail on a few things, or bring a couple aspects into how you work with business owners. But Eric Lawton, it's been great having you here. Great conversation. Really appreciate you spending time. I know you're a busy guy, and thanks again for being with us.
You bet.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Again, my name's Keith D. Thank you for being with us today on the ins and outs of selling a business. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Ins and Outs of Selling a Business. To learn about Osage Advisors, you can reach us at our website, osageadvisors.com. Feel free to email me at kdee@osageadvisors.com with any questions, or pick up the phone and give me a call at 860-767-3273, extension 1001. Thanks again for being with us, and have a great day.